All right, hello everyone. Welcome here in person, and people that are in Zoom land. Hopefully, you're hearing us well. I think you are. And welcome to the third lecture of the Persuasive Maps Map Month. This is a month in which we try to persuade you, or well, actually, we look at how maps through history have been trying to persuade us for one thing or another. And this time, it's going to be about persuading us about a region that we are very familiar with, and that's the Southwest of the United States. Now, to get us started here and talk a little bit about Map Month and introduce our speaker, we have Mr. Wes Brown. Thank you.
Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I just want to tell you that it's not over yet. You have one more week of Map Month that you can come and hear a lecture, and that is by Chet Van Duzer. And the name of his talk is Colonialism in the Cartouche Imagery and Power of Early Modern Maps. Now, Chet is well, maybe Dennis or Susan, but he's one of the ultimate map people. He's an itinerant map scholar that goes from institution to institution, publishing things and all. And I think you'll like his talk next week. But tonight you get to hear from Dennis Reinhartz, Professor Dennis Reinhartz. And he has over 40 years. Were you at UT Arlington for 40 years? 35. Sorry, I'm exaggerating. He was elsewhere for another, so 40 years as a history professor, specializing in Russian, which has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about tonight. As a matter of fact, you're giving your talk in Russian, aren't you? So anyhow, he fell in love with maps, and he might tell you about that a long time ago. But I rather than going through a resume of all of his many books and scholarly appointments and societal presidencies, he's given me permission to tell you his age, and his age is 80. Now, I'm going to tell you just what in his 80th year he's accomplished. He has been a scholar in residence at the State Library in New South Wales, where he just came back. He has published 4 articles, a book chapter, 6 presentations have been made, and numerous book reviews. The guy's 80 years old. I mean, wow, that is amazing. We can all hope to aspire to something like that. So at least this fellow has more experience than most of us in the room. And please help me in welcoming Professor Dennis Reinhartz.
Well, thank you, Wes. I now feel 80. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to be part of the Map Month. It also, it was sort of Don McGurk who talked me into doing this. And he said, you know, you've got a lot of stuff that you've done and that you'd still like to do. He said, have some fun when you do this. So tonight we're going to try to have, or this afternoon, we're going to try to have some fun. And I hope you will have it with me. Again, I've been involved with popular promotional cartography throughout my career. I think the first example of it that I got involved with was a postcard that extolled a place. And I said, but I know this place. It's in New Jersey, where I come from. And I said, that's not it. In other words, it just never existed like that, you know. And so I really, that I guess was the beginning of it. But by way of introduction, let me just say a few words about popular promotional cartography. I've restricted myself tonight to the region that we live in, and that is the Southwest, and also most especially to the idea of regions, states, and localities, and that is how they deal with themselves and how they portray themselves to others and for what reasons. Now, popular promotional cartography is very diverse in the way it exists and the way it renders its message. It is also consciously reflective of a region or a state's or locality self-image. That is how people in this place see themselves. And at the same time, it hopes to be seen that is to make these places seem attractive to outsiders. And again, the outsider is an important part of this equation. Popular cartographic images are often manipulated, they're often exaggerated, they're very innovative in some cases and often comedic. And they also tap into the images that outsiders have of a place. And I guess what I'm getting to is that they, even though they're not usually the work of professional map makers, that is of cartographers, but usually the work of design, cartoon, or other artists, they nevertheless are very complex, and they can be important sources of history, geography, historical geography, and attitudes over time. Now, most of the images that I will show you can also be seen in the genre of ephemera. Now, some of you are familiar with Frank Manasek's book, Collecting Old Maps, and he defines ephemera, and it's as good a definition as any, as material intended for transient use. It is not made with the intention of having a long or a lasting value. Examples of ephemera are bus tickets, timetables, or road maps. Now, ephemeral maps are a legitimate genre in the history of cartography. They also make up a very significant part of the cartography of global democracies. In other words, ephemeral maps are probably the most extensive maps that you'll find in a democratic society. Although they are ubiquitous, fragile, and disposable, all maps, including these ephemeral maps, have a long-lasting value. Also, ephemeral maps, like any other map, are not trivial. In other words, they shouldn't be just dismissed as trivia. And I will try to show you how that works. They also can be classified as cartefacts. Now, if you never heard the term cartefact before, it's a term that J.B. Post, my friend Judy Tyner, and I coined some years ago. And what it is, it's a cartographic artifact. And that is, it's in fact something that, while it has cartographic content, does not necessarily function primarily as a map. It has other, maybe more important functions. Now, the lure of professional promotional popular cartography, and I think you'll see this tonight, is that it has, like other types of mapping, has an intrinsic charisma. And that is, there is something in this stuff that will grab a hold of you, just the way a map will grab a hold of you. And as we all know, maps grab a hold of different people in different ways. Wes and I today were talking about that he's really into the small parts of maps where detail is to be found and so on, where I am much more interested in the historical context, that they come out of. But nevertheless, we're both committed to cartography and its history. And lastly, by way of introduction, I might say that popular promotional cartography, particularly, I would argue, with regard to our region, is very intimately involved with the very important industry of tourism and boosterism. Now, in my own state, New Mexico, the largest industry is now tourism. It has edged out energy and has edged out agriculture. And so tourism and entertainment is now where most of our, or a large part of our state revenue comes from. All right. Now, most of you are probably familiar with something like this postcard map. And by way of my own involvement in the area, let me use this as an exemplar. I have been involved with this kind of cartography for almost 50 years, and especially postcard maps, and especially Texas postcard maps, and especially expansionist Texas postcard maps, such as this. In 1988, when I was teaching at the University of London and also at Oxford, I was invited, surprisingly invited, to the opening of a major map exhibit at the British Library called Of What Use a Map? And this big exhibit, it was just around 50 items in the exhibit, was really impressive because it had some of the great holdings of the British Library or the British Museum. It also had items that were brought in for the exhibit. And as I was going through it, I came upon this, and that is this humble Texas postcard map. And I had an epiphany, and that is my own collection of postcard maps, some 700 plus, and my work with them all of a sudden was given dignity and value. In other words, I came out of the closet and I said, gee, this is wonderful. And man standing next to me at the exhibit, he said, so you know this map? I said, oh, yes. And so many like it. Well, I found out later at the reception, the man who questioned me, and we talked further, was Geoffrey Archer, the British author. And at that point, he was, in fact, steeped in controversy of his own, taking on Margaret Thatcher on a number of issues, particularly with regard to constitutional rights in Britain. But in any case, so what we have here is a really good example of the kind of thing that we talk about when we talk about regional promotional cartography or state promotional cartography. Remember, map postcards or postcards in general are meant to be sent by tourists who come into an area, a place, and they send it home to Uncle Ned and Aunt Nellie and say, "Ooh, look what we see." And a number of my maps actually have 10 dots on them and saying, "We're here. We're here in this part of this state," And at the same time, though, they're also meant to be sent by residents of a place to people outside saying, "Hey, look at us, come visit," et cetera, et cetera. But in any case, they verify the old saying, I think, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Let me not spend 1,000 words on this humble exhibit here, but let me explain a little bit about what it's saying. First of all, it's saying Texas is big. And even in the real world, Texas is big. It's also saying that big is part of Texas culture. And with big comes the implication of best. And so lots about Texas is bigger and better. It's also showing you a little bit about Texas paranoia, and that is, in all of this bluster, there is a certain paranoia involved. First of all, let me go to my homeland up in the Northeast, and that is the area of New Jersey and New York. Well, you see it portrayed here as some sort of reservation for weirdos that's fenced off, and it's called Damn Yankee Land. Now, if you go to the West Coast, you see California, the other Texas rival, being shrunken in size and called uninhabitable. And the third one is down in the Southeast and Florida, and you see swampland. One more thing that this map says to me is that Texans have a sense of humor. And that is, they have a sense of humor about their world and the world around them, but they also aren't averse to laughing at themselves. And to a degree, there is some of this going on. All right, now let's get into more serious regional business here. This simple map of the Four Corners area, again, says a great deal. First of all, again, we see here now how the Southwest becomes linked with exoticism. In other words, one of the things that makes the Southwest so interesting to people who don't know it well is that it seems awfully exotic. And first of all, of course, we have the landforms. Now, none of the images on here are more than 120 miles away from the Four Corners Monument. But if you look up into Utah, you have misplaced, but you have Monument Valley that's shared with Arizona. You have, of course, the spectacular arches of Utah. If you come down into Arizona, you see again some more of the arches and some more of Monument Valley. If you here in Colorado, of course, you have the Rocky Mountains. And then down in New Mexico, you have Shiprock. So in other words, this is fairly exotic topography. I mean, first of all, one of the things it all has in common and that outsiders have a hard time with is it's not green. The only thing green in the real Southwest are aliens. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Secondly, what we see here is the long presence of Native Americans. You see the pictographs, you see the Puebloan pot in the middle, you see the Navajo Hogan down in the lower right-hand corner. And again, even old Kokopelli, who was one of the great icons of the Southwest. Now, this is carried on further, this kind of thing, with now an emphasis on indigenous art and culture. Now, this is a map of the Dinétah, and that is the Navajo land. And again, if you look into this reservation, or the Big Res, as it's often called, you'll see, first of all, it's very large, and it dominates a large part of the Four Corners. And inside this map, you see, again, the landforms. Again, the arches are there, Shiprock is there, etc. You see, again, ruins, just the way you saw on the first map where you had Mesa Verde. And you see, again, obviously, the native presence. This is the biggest native reservation in the Americas. It is probably in the world. I didn't find any larger in Australia, and they had a lot more room. So it's probably the largest native reservation in the world. And it's also, in this country, the largest native population in our country. Now, all of this comes out, but it's also now there's the emphasis on culture and art. And it is done here with the various types of Navajo weavings and the indications of where the styles come from. Talking about icons. Okay, and I told you we'd get back to aliens. Not the aliens that are in the news every day, but this kind of alien. And that is that this is actually a fairly serious poster, and I think it also exists as a postcard about the alien phenomena, particularly in the Southwest. And it all, of course, stems from the alleged crash of a UFO outside of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 at the time of the 4th of July. And from there, then you see that it's not only Roswell in New Mexico that has all of these visitations, but all over the region. And again, I stress this is very serious. This is not meant to be comedic or funny. If you look up to where John Kennedy's image is, it says, was JFK shot to prevent him from revealing the truth about UFOs when he was to deliver a speech on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Now, they're serious about this. This is not, I mean, it might be funny to us, but it's really not. This kind of thing has created a new iconography for the Southwest, and that is the iconography of the alien, the UFO, which has then gotten into popular culture. I only have to say X-Files, and it brings all kinds of ideas to your mind. We'll get back to more of that. Now, another way of popularizing the state, the region, is just by taking individual maps of states, in this case, California, and what you do is you pepper them with place names, you pepper them with icons, you do a decent job at design and color, and you then have these explosive images of states and what they're all about, or at least what they say they're all about. And I like this one. Again, I have East Coast prejudices against California, but there are also things here that remind me of growing up on the East Coast. For example, you have sport fishing, you have surfing, for which Californians are known from. And in New Jersey, you also have 6-foot blonde beauties on the beach that we thought every girl was in California growing up on the East Coast. You also have internally in the map, you have all kinds of sites beyond the Golden Gate Bridge. You have the Capitol at Sacramento with its Golden Dome. You have coming further down the state, Mission at Santa Barbara, Hollywood, and even Town, that is Miramar, where Top Gun is, or the Top Guns are trained. But you also then have agricultural icons, which then boast of California's power as an agricultural state. There's a lot more going on, but here is Utah. And again, we look at the icons, you see the state bird, the gull, you see the state flag, the state flower, and below the flag, the Mormon beehive, which is a symbol of the Mormon culture, and in fact comes very much out of Mormon history. You also have the Great Salt Lake. You have Promontory Point north of it, where Transcontinental Railroad was completed. In the south, you have the Arches. You also have any number of pursuits you can take care of in Utah, such as skiing, and then again, the Native American ancient presence. Now, on the right, you have a copper-clad postcard, which is similar to the one on the left, except I would argue this one was never meant to be mailed, because by virtue of the fact of how heavy it is, and secondly, if you sent this through the post, through the mail, you can tell I've been in Australia for 4 weeks when I say post. If you send it through the mail, it would get crushed. So this was actually meant to be a souvenir that you buy and take home with you and look at regularly and remember what you saw, for example, in Utah. Now, here is a map that was published by the Santa Fe Railroad, and its purpose was to get people to get on the train, and that is winter or summer, any time of year, and come to the Southwest. Again, we have the Four Corners, but primarily here we're talking about Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona. And if you look at the map, again, you see in the north, Mesa Verde. You see the Central Mountain chain coming down through New Mexico, which is the southern extent of the Rockies. You have also other landforms. You have the Grand Canyon. And now the icons are really pushing the cowboy and Indian culture of the area. So you'll look at numerous of them, some of them historic, some of them not, but really pushing the idea of cowboys and Indians. And this is the place to see the real thing. Now, you have on here not only the roads, but you have the railroads, the railroad tracks, but too, you have indications of the extra trips you could take. Now, Santa Fe Railroad, from early on, sponsored, once they got into the business of tourism, sponsored trips in buses that you could pick up in places like Lamy, New Mexico, or Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they would take you, or up around Gallup, and they would take you then to the areas that you couldn't reach by train. And one of those areas, of course, was Mesa Verde in Colorado. This is my personal favorite of all of this stuff, and that is, it's a tourist map published by the state of New Mexico, and its purpose is to bring people to the land of enchantment for vacations. It's a fairly simple map. It has, again, the Central Mountain chain, the Rio Grande River, and then it has any number of icons dealing with history, such as the Santa Fe Trail. It also has icons, again, dealing with cowboys and Indians, and also some of the natural wildlife and other aspects of the state. And again, you see in the lower right-hand corner, a tourist couple with their son, and they have come by car. And again, this is to tap into the explosion in automobile travel that occurred after the Second World War. And if you look at this tourist family and you look at the dress the woman is wearing and the cowboy hat on the boy, they've already bought into New Mexico. Again, I think fairly spectacular images here. These are two classic Art Deco, Southwestern Art Deco covers of official state road maps from New Mexico from 1936 and 1937. Again, the Native American imagery is obvious. The 1937 image actually has Taos Pueblo on it. Also, the landscape of the mountains is again repeated on these covers. You see automobiles, and again, automobiles, sure, because these are road maps. And again, the idea is to get people to come to New Mexico, and driving is just as good as anywhere else. Now, anything else, if you look at the maps and at the covers themselves, and you begin to worry, this is really too exotic for me. This is too wild Southwest for me. You know, what'll happen to me when I go there? Well, you'll see the state says that all of the highways and principal roads are motor patrolled. And so in other words, you will be safe in this place that you have no idea really of what it's like. Oh, I should go back one. Also, there's an interesting indicator here. 1936, you'll see that New Mexico called itself the Sunshine State. In 1937, they changed to the Land of Enchantment. They left the Sunshine State behind, first to California and then to Florida. Today, New Mexico remains the Land of Enchantment and Florida remains the Sunshine State. This simple little card, I put it in there because it reflects a pet peeve, and it's one that my wife and I verified in Australia. What you see is a simple map of New Mexico, the state bird, the roadrunner, the state vegetable, the chili. Yes, we have a state vegetable. And the state question, we even have a state question, and that is, it's not your place or mine, but it's red or green. You see too, the road sign or the signs say US to the east, US to the west, Mexico to the south. And the big chili is saying, I didn't think you needed a passport or visa to visit New Mexico. And this is because people who don't know New Mexico or about New Mexico are consistently confusing us with Mexico. And in Australia, when people asked us where we're from, we said Santa Fe, New Mexico. Oh, Mexico. No, not Mexico. You know, south of Colorado, east of Arizona, New Mexico. And this bothers New Mexicans dearly. If you look at our license plates, we even have New Mexico, USA on them to inform people that we are in fact a state. We are in fact the 49th state of the Union. Okay, here's something a little bit different. This is a label, again, wonderful Art Deco work here of from a Texas citrus crate. And it's the Gold Mine Citrus Company, or Gold Mine is their brand, and it's the Valley Fruit Company down in Pharr, Texas. Now, Pharr is located down near the Rio Grande Valley, and this is in fact a major Texas agricultural area even today, and known for its citrus, particularly ruby red grapefruits. And this then was an advertisement on the side of a crate of fruit. And it's telling you all you need to know about where this fruit comes from and what it's all about. But it's also saying, hey, out there, we grow citrus the way Florida does and the way California does. And again, there are the reference to competition and promotion. It's the one I told you about, Wes. This map appeared in an article in the New Mexico magazine, and the article was on the diversity of the region, the Southwest. And it shows then the states of the Southwest. And the image here is to convey, yeah, well, we're all part of one region, but we're also very different. and we don't quite get along with each other. And so you see California in the West being maybe somewhat more sophisticated, somewhat more aloof, somewhat more prideful. And you then come east and you see Nevada and Utah engaged in a sort of love-hate relationship there. And you go south of there, you see Arizona as a cowboy having its problems with California. You go east of Arizona and you have New Mexico being very aloof, portrayed as an alien wearing a bolo tie. And to the north of New Mexico, you have Colorado, the cowboy, the wrangler, the herder, trying to keep everybody in the region together. And the gist of the article was, in fact, that Colorado is perhaps even more cosmopolitan than California because it reflects both the region and outside the region better. Wes showed me a copy of this today. This is a poster and a postcard. And what you see, the base map of Texas, is in fact the 1849 Cordoba map of Texas with the extended panhandle. And this was the way Texas hoped to be admitted to the Union after the Mexican-American War. It didn't. In other words, it didn't make all that to bring all that territory in. Now, again, this shows some of the problems that regional areas have, regional states have with each other. For example, if you look at the ski areas of Texas, they in fact are all in New Mexico and Colorado. And this harkens me back to when I first used to go to New Mexico, particularly in southern New Mexico. There was a popular bumper sticker that New Mexicans had, and it said that if God had intended Texicans to ski, he would have painted bullshit white. You don't see much of that anymore, but it was really all over the place in the southern part of New Mexico. Southern part of New Mexico is referred to often as Little Texas because of its ranching and cattle heritage, which then came out of Texas. Here's another commentary on New Mexico having to put up with Texas. This is a cartoon that appeared in the Santa Fe New Mexican, and it is by Roberto Cate. Roberto Cate is a Santo Domingo Puebloan, or Kewah Pueblo, and his cartoons appear every day in the New Mexican, and he comments on all things and everything having to do with Indians, having to do with the Southwest. And he's got his stereotypical little Indians, for example, his stereotypical Indian has a war bonnet. Well, there are no people in New Mexico natives who use war bonnets, but that's his stereotypical little Indian. His stereotypic Anglo is Custer, and that is the various representations of Custer. But here you just have a commentary on what it's like to be New Mexico living next to Texas. Now, should you think this kind of regional discord is endemic to the Southwest or even to the United States, here is a postcard that a former student of mine sent to me. She is from New Zealand. She got her master's degree at the university in history, and she is a veteran of my graduate history cartography class. And what we see here is the two islands, main islands of New Zealand, greatly expanded, and the island of Australia, the island continent of Australia, greatly reduced, becoming the West Island of New Zealand, and the Kiwi and the kangaroo having a heated discussion about the situation. I, by the way, also have a map, a postcard of New South Wales, expanded over all of Australia. And I did find out that while we were there, because I was based in New South Wales, that people do have some problems with people from New South Wales thinking they represent all of Australia. So, you know, this stuff is not common necessarily only to the US. All right, a couple of other examples. Here you'll see a couple of cartoon maps. of the various states of the Southwest. This is Nevada. Now, with humor and through cartoons, and you can spend hours on things like this and look inside the state, and eventually you'll get a good idea of what Nevada is all about and how they see themselves. You look west of Nevada, you obviously see they have some problems with California, which is called Califunny, and there's a smog bank coast of California, on the coast of California. And if you look east, you will find they too have some problems, and I don't understand why, with New York and New Jersey, but in fact they do. Here's a similar map of Arizona, and again, if you look internally into the map, you'll get a good idea of what Arizona is all about. Look west, and once again, you see problems with California, which now is labeled to a large extent uninhabitable. And if you look east, look at New Mexico. Obviously, Arizona has some problems with New Mexico. And this might be as a result of the long time that Arizona spent as part of the province of New Mexico under Spain and Mexico, and then as part of the territory of New Mexico prior to the Civil War. Another example of Texas expansionism. This is a plate, and it's a very nice China plate. It's not just plaster, it's China, bone China, and it's got gold leafing around the edges. And inside, you have then this expansionist map of Texas. And if you look closely, everything in Texas is either the biggest or the best. And if you look outside of Texas, they have the same problem back in 1936 with the Yankees and with the Californians. Now, this plate was meant to be purchased by tourists in Texas. It was meant to be taken home and put in the China cabinet at home and to be regularly displayed and venerated. Just the way it is in my house, in our China cabinet, and it has been since we brought it back from the antique shop in Roswell, New Mexico. I put this example in here, again, not only because it's an expansionist map of Texas, but it really reflects upon a tradition of humorous cartoon art in Texas. There is this very solid strain of humorous cartoon art in Texas that takes on just about every aspect of Texas: history, geography, culture, and so on. Now, C.M. Rogers was part of a long tradition of this kind of art that included Jack Patton and a very good friend of mine, Jack Jackson, who was also a fairly significant historian of cartography. What you see here again in Texas, everything is bigger and better. You see also, some of the humor that is associated with other maps like this. Now, Rogers was from Austin, Texas, born and bred and raised in Austin, Texas. He's self-taught as an artist. He self-published his stuff. He self-marketed his stuff to the point of where his wife, Eileen, used to drive his stuff to gift shops and arrange deals with the gift shops to sell it, starting in San Antonio, where it actually took off, and then it spread, well over large parts of Texas. Now, this one was particularly tailored to South Texas, to South Padre Island, and you can see that in the comments that the cowboy is making, which, by the way, is a self-portrait of Rogers himself. And you see, again, the usual bashing going on of the Yankees, of the Californians. But there's a new contender here, and that is Alaska. Since the 1950s, of course, Texas is no longer the biggest state, but it is the second biggest state. Now, the normal Texas response to that is, wait till the ice melts, But here you see, in fact, Rogers' rendition, and he says up there, a big iceberg where it usually snows, filled with blubber seals and Eskimos. Unlike Texans who bask in the breeze, folks here, that is Alaska, sit on their ice and freeze. Again, the turn of language is also kind of funny here. Not all of Rogers's stuff is maps. And in fact, very little of it is. I would say about 10% of his output has to do with maps. Much of the rest are just interesting cartoons, again, about Texas, commentary on Texas, and, you know, sort of self-deprecating in some cases. Conclude with a couple of localities. Now, this is our hometown, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it is state capital. It is the oldest state capital in the country. It is the second oldest city in the country, second only to St. Augustine. And it is portrayed here as the state capital, the star, which would be on a map, but it is exploding out of an exploded state. And the map itself is actually for tourists not bad because it shows many of the attractions of the old town of Santa Fe. And that is, you have the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi. You have, in fact, the La Fonda Hotel. You have the state capitol, and that is the Roundhouse. You also have the now controversial monument in the middle of the plaza. And you'll also know, oh, and Sosobra is standing next to the cathedral. For those of you that don't know Sosobra is Old Man Gloom, and it is burned every year. It is New Mexico's Burning Man, and this year it will be 100 years old, so it's far older than Santa Fe, than Nevada's. And you take all your sorrows, your gloom, you write it on a piece of paper, you give it to the Kiwanis Club, and they stuff it in there, and they burn it for you in the last fiesta of the year, which is a fiesta dedicated to Spanish New Mexico. And but you'll also see several branch offices of Albuquerque Federal Bank, and that's because Albuquerque Federal put up the money to publish this map, and so that's how they got their part. Now, if you go south and you go off the cliff, you'll find at the bottom of this chasm Albuquerque. And that again relates to the long-standing rivalry going back to Spanish times between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And also it relates to the fact that we in Santa Fe live at 7,200 square feet, and in Albuquerque they live, as you do in Denver, at about 5,000. And so that cliff is that difference. And we're always happy to say that it's 5 degrees cooler in Santa Fe at any given time because of the altitude shift. Now, if you look outside of Santa Fe and the expanded New Mexico, you see Texas, which is indicated as being puny. And if you go west, you see California cracking along its fault line, being held together by ropes and spikes. Back to the aliens. And that is where we will ultimately conclude. Now, since 1947, well, actually since the 60s, Roswell has consciously reinvented itself around the aliens and this alleged crash that took place. And you see here a representation by a local artist of the crash, and in fact, showing the yucca, which is the state plant. And you also then have this alien somewhat dazed, asking, where is Roswell? Well, where indeed? Because not too many people knew about Roswell before this event allegedly happened. That is the Roswell incident. Roswell started as a ranching, farming community, and again, tied very close to South Texas. It also had ties to the military at various points. And in fact, it is where Robert Goddard, the father of American rocketry, carried out his first experiments. So it actually does have a space age root, though not necessarily alien. But since the 60s it's become the big deal. And it's the way I encourage you, go to Roswell's website. It is a joy to watch because, and I say watch because it's not only just the website, but little flying saucers periodically zoom through. They do formation flights around it and so on and so forth. Now, every year in Roswell, around the 4th of July, the week surrounding the 4th of July, there is the annual Alien Festival. And let me tell you, if you haven't been there, it's worth doing. First of all, the convention center is full of very serious people reading papers, discussing UFOs very seriously. I mean, it's fun to watch just to laugh at them, but they don't laugh at each other. In other words, these are people committed to the idea that not only that we are not alone, but that we are regularly visited. Now, before you ask, I do not believe that we are alone either. But have we been visited? I have seen no evidence to that effect. And now you go to the museum in Roswell, they have the UFO museum. Oh, it's a joy. It's hilarious. It's fun. The gift shop's even better. You know? Anyway, beyond what goes on in the convention center, they have a parade, which is a costume parade, and it's a joy. The city goes overboard decorating with aliens. If you go now, you'll still see Roswell. The light posts are green alien heads. And in the various hotels, there are all kinds of alien iconography in that. But on the festival time, oh, it's wonderful. Well, I bought this shirt at one of the festivals. And what you see here is a map of New Mexico showing Roswell dominated by an alien. And it, I think, says it all. Now, my favorite shirt that I bought at one of these festivals just has a green alien head on. And by the way, you have to distinguish between greenies and grays, but the greenies are the best. And it has on it this alien head, and it says, alien, tastes like chicken, or really good gopher. And the reason it appeals to me is because I spent 35 years in Texas, and I now have more recipes to do gopher. I never knew you could eat gopher, but in Texas they do, and most of it's fried. And so it reminded me of Texas, so I bought that shirt as well. Now, I thank you for your attention, and let me summarize by saying this popular promotional cartography of the Southwest proves to me that Exotica sells. And I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Wes?
What states beyond Texas have most gotten into this? We are the greatest, we're the largest, as you've evaluated.
Well, I interestingly enough, there are some you would expect, and that is California does it, but they do it, shall we say, not as boldly or as brashly as Texas. It's much more sophisticated in the way they do it. New York does a good deal of it, and coming from there, I would say rightly so. But oddly enough, I've got a bunch from Missouri. Okay, now I've not spent a lot of time in Missouri, but I'm not sure. You know, and then there are also a bunch from Iowa, right? And I had a very good Iowa. Yeah, I had a very good friend, and Wes may remembered him too, Robert Heibarger. Well, Robert Heibarger, who was a map collector and ex-spook and worked for NSA, he and his wife came from a small town in Iowa, and when they took their children back, adult children back to visit this town, they coined the place Crib Death, Iowa. And I've always had that image of Iowa. I haven't spent that much time, but I can't see this expansionist stuff. I mean, other than a big head of corn and a fat hog, you know. But, you know, I guess you have to be Iowan to appreciate it, right? But, you know, it runs the gambit. In Europe, you have to be careful when you do stuff like this because of European history. And that is, you cannot imagine a German expansionist postcard or poster. There are images that immediately spring, and arguably even the French would not do something like this because of their long history of expansion, et cetera. So it's you know, within the States, within the new world of the Americas and Australia, you know, it's a lot easier to have fun with this kind of stuff and make a point. Yes. Yeah, in other words, I would argue if you go, oh, are there any additional collections, institutional collections of these kinds of things or tourist maps? I would argue if you go, for example, I bet there are some here at the Denver Public Library. I know there are some at the History Museum of New Mexico in Santa Fe, because some of these images I got from that collection. There are also some of this stuff exists at, for example, Rutgers University in New Jersey. I have a whole book on the mapping of New Jersey, believe it or not, and about 25% of it is this kind of popular cartography. And it all comes out of the Rutgers collection. So I think they may not be well known, but I bet if you checked, you would find them. It seems to me, by the way, Texas A&M also has an archive of this stuff. Where? No, not really. Well, Wes showed me some pictorial maps today that he collects, and I'm like him. I look at all kinds of stuff. You look at dealers' catalogs. A lot of this stuff is, there are a lot of dealers now who are beginning to realize that this popular cartography has some value. And, you know, in my case, I go with what I find interesting, what I like. And there are lots of bases for what I like, one of which is design and color. I mean, if you didn't get that from what I showed you, you did nod off. But like this wonderful image, you know, comes from, again, a piece of literature, a pamphlet that Roswell puts out for tourists. All right, I thank you then.
Thank you, Dennis. What a wonderful presentation. I told you it would be fun, and it was.
Well, I had fun. I hope you did.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week for the last of the Persuasive Maps lecture. Bye-bye.